Today we're going to be discussing the 400 years of slavery mentioned in the Bible and how Black Americans specifically was the fulfillment of this prophecy. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this prophecy is, basically the Most High told the prophet Abraham that his descendants would go into a strange land that is not theirs and they will become enslaved for 400 years while being oppressed. It has been badly misinterpreted by the church that this prophecy was fulfilled when the Israelites became enslaved during their time in Egypt. But it's already been debunked that the Israelites were not slaves in Egypt for more than 400 years. In fact, it was probably less than 200 years that they became slaves. So the church confused this prophecy with the mention of the children of Israel dwelling in the land of Canaan and Egypt in the total amount of 430 years, mentioned in Exodus 12, verse 40. So from the time that Abraham arrived in Canaan up until the death of Joseph in Egypt, that would have been 300 years in which the Israelites were not enslaved nor oppressed, which disqualifies this from being the prophecy mentioned in Genesis 15. The amount of years of them being enslaved in Egypt would not add up to the 400 years total mentioned in Genesis 15. Here's what scripture says must happen in order for this Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. Genesis 15, verses 12 through 13. As the sun was setting, Abraham fell into a deep sleep. Then the Most High said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they shall serve them, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years." So the Israelites' enslavement in Egypt does not fulfill this prophecy. So if it wasn't Egypt, then what other time period did they become oppressed in a strange land that was not theirs for 400 years? Now, you can read the Bible from front to back, and you're not going to find anything about Israelites being oppressed in a foreign land for over 400 years, which could only mean that this prophecy had to take place in a future time period outside of the documented history that we're given on the Israelites in the Bible. And the last book of the Bible, which is the book of Revelations, was estimated to be written around 100 AD. So this prophecy could only be fulfilled after that date. So from 100 AD and up until now, which group of people were oppressed in a foreign land for 400 years? Also, they would have to match the description of being the descendants of Abraham. And the only ones I see being the fulfillment of this prophecy is Black people in America, and I'll explain why. There's scripture all throughout the Bible that'll offer context as to why the Israelites would end up being strangers in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. This prophetic verse in Jeremiah is a direct match with the 400 years prophecy mentioned in Genesis 15. It says, "And thou even thyself shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave you, and I will cause you to serve your enemies in a land which you know not, for you have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever." Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 4. So we know that the Israelites will become servants or slaves to their enemies in this foreign land. But this Jeremiah verse adds even more of a hint by saying that the heritage of these Israelites would be lost while in that foreign land. So we know that the so-called Black people of America was brought to this land as strangers, but did they also lose their heritage in the process? The answer is yes. Negroes came to America butt naked and in chains. They did not bring anything else other than themselves. But while in America, these slave masters would change the last name of these black slaves, as well as force them to convert to their religion. So their heritage was discontinued, as the Bible verse says. You see, to be the chosen people of the Bible, not only do you have to be the blood descendants of the Israelites, but you also have to fit the description of what the Bible says about you. You see, most people associate themselves with being the Israelites or the chosen people simply because they want the blessings or the perks that come along with it. But what they fail to realize is the Israelites was actually cursed by the Most High. So the people claiming to be the chosen people must realize that their history must reflect them having to suffer a lot due to these curses. See, if people laid claim to these curses, they probably wouldn't want to be associated with being Israelites. So when you see groups of people such as the Ashkenazi Jews claiming to be the chosen people, ask yourself, are these people seen as being cursed? Were they enslaved and brought into captivity? Do they have no power to stand against their enemies? Were they sent back to Egypt again by ships, exiled in the land of their enemies, scattered among all nations, a very sick and disease-stricken people, at the bottom socially with other races higher above them, lost the true knowledge of who they are and will be called by many scornful nicknames other than Israel and Hebrew, packed into prisons and jails, a non-prosperous people and oppressed by their enemies? I do not see these people as being cursed in the sense of what the Bible says. They are one of the most protected class of people on earth. They are financially prosperous. They are not oppressed by their enemies. And if that's not enough, we're told that in order for us to be blessed, we must bless them first. So, from what I see, their condition is the total opposite from the curses that were brought upon the real Israelites. Plus, they were never brought over by ships and enslaved in a foreign land for 400 years.
Are you yielding about 3 minutes of time? I just want to take a few moments to thank the House for the work they did recently on H.R. 1242. And I want to urge the Senate to take action on this bill as well. So I rise in support of it. It's 1242. It's titled 400 Years of African American History Commission Act. I'm a co-sponsor of this legislation. I worked with my colleagues to pass this act in the House. I look forward to the Senate also passing this bill. I believe it's important for all citizens of the United States to recognize the unique history, sacrifices, and remarkable contributions that African Americans have made to build our great nation. I'm invigorated by this legislative intention to identify and educate the public on the arrival of Africans and their role in building this great country. It is equally important to understand the generational impact that slavery and laws that enforce racial discrimination had on our United States. While there have been many successful and inspirational African Americans with innumerable contributions, we must address ongoing disparities in employment and education by focusing on achieving 6 milestones for success.
So, as you can see, it is federally documented and signed into law that Black Americans were brought over into this foreign land and have been here for over 400 years. So Black people fit perfect into Bible prophecy pertaining to the Israelites, unlike the Ashkenazi Jews who came from Europe. They never lost their heritage, and they also were never forced to stop calling themselves Jewish. So-called Black people had their names and history erased, and they was called Negro, Blacks, African American, as well as colored people, which are clearly bywords as mentioned in Joel chapter 2 verse 17. It's also important to mention that these Jewish people profited off the transatlantic slave trade. In 2009, the British Rothschild Bank actually issued an apology for their past links between their founders and the transatlantic slave trade. But not only did they make money financing the slave ships, but they also made money being slave owners here in the States. It is said over 75% of all Jewish families in the South were slave owners. So from the vast amount of wealth off of the slave trade, they then was able to create their own Zionist state of Israel. If you do not know, the Rothschilds is directly involved with the creation of Zionist Israel, but I'll get into that another time. I just wanted to show you guys the proof that their condition is the opposite of what the Bible says about the Jews. In Revelation chapter 2 verse 9, it says, I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. Lamentations 4:6 even says that the punishment of the Jews was greater than the sin of Sodom that was overthrown in a moment and no hand stayed on her. And lastly, Isaiah chapter 40 verse 2 said that the Jews would receive double the punishment for all of their sins. So this is why Yahuah told Abraham, know for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. He knew ahead what was to come upon the real Jews of the Bible. Who else can say they were an object of ridicule, a byword, and oppressed for 400 years? This has been the case for Black Americans for 400 years. They promised us freedom, but then came along the KKK and the lynching of Black people. We also was treated as second-class citizens, being segregated from white society. So we fought for our rights, and then they promised us equality. They said we would be treated equally as the whites. And then came along the destructive war on drugs, as well as the mass incarceration of Black men. Then they promised us change by electing the first Black man as president. But nothing changed for Black people's conditions in America. Cops were still killing unarmed Black men, and Black people were ranked the highest in number of race-based hate crime incidents in the United States back in 2021. I'm sure this has not changed. Now, being oppressed for 400 years was just one part of the prophecy. Here's what the rest of the prophecy says in Genesis chapter 15, 13 through 14. It says, "And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance." So the Black Jews arrived to America in 1619. So 400 years later would be 2019, which means the judgment of the Most High would be occurring already. So ask yourself, after 2019, has America remained the same, or has things gotten worse for America? Another thing we should have answers to is as to why the Most High is going to judge this nation if he allowed them to take his chosen people in the first place. Here's what scripture says. Zechariah chapter 1 verse 15, it says, "I am angry with the nations that enjoy quiet and peace, for while I was holding back my anger against my people, those nations made the sufferings of my people worse." Here's what Isaiah chapter 47, verse 6 through 7 says. It says, "I was angry with my people and desecrated my inheritance. I gave them into your hand, and you showed them no mercy. Even on the aged, you laid a very heavy yoke. You said, I am forever the eternal queen, but you did not consider these things or reflect on what might happen." So the Most High is not angry that he allowed his chosen people to go through captivity because that's a part of their judgment. The Most High is angry that these nations made the suffering of his people even worse. They took the punishment way too far. They showed no mercy upon the chosen people of Yahuah. Remember, America is supposed to be a Christian nation, but the things that they have done to the chosen people of Yahuah during these 400 years just show that they had no respect towards the Most High. Neither did they take into consideration that they might be judged for doing so. James chapter 2 verse 13 says, "For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy." Ever since America came into existence, they have been unmerciful not just to Black people, but the people all across the world. They was the first to drop a nuclear bomb on civilians. Many do not like to hear this or admit to it, but the American dream was built off of crimes against humanity from its beginning. The national anthem of America even testifies to this. In the Star Spangled Banner, stanza 3, it says, "No refugee could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave." So this so-called Christian nation believed that Black people should remain as slaves forever. I'm going to go over the different errors that they have oppressed us during these 400 years. It wasn't just the slave masters who was cruel against their slave captives, but it was also the capitalists. They once used Black babies as alligator bait to make money.
Available in color. The many surviving examples of such postcards tell a horrendous story. They were meant to address the people willing to use the lives of Black children to collect a prized commodity, alligator skin. The white hunters were using human blood and flesh to lure monstrous crocodiles and alligators. To prepare for the activity, it is said that some white people kidnapped black children, tied them to a string, and dropped them in the swamps. Others would get groups of children and order them to stay over the alligator swamp, near the open mouths of hungry alligators. These children were fed to the predator's hole. This is a documented event that can also be seen in old artifacts, such as product packaging and knickknacks. Here is a classic example of household ornaments that were sold in areas where alligator baits were deemed a tourist attraction. At the time, the shelves in stores were covered with these decorative objects. These antiques come in bold colors and highly intricate designs that don't shy away from America's brutal past. Many of these trinkets are displayed in the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Imagery.
Now, if the capitalists was able to do that to innocent babies, what do you think they was willing to do to anyone else? It is widely known that slave masters would rape black women. They also would use a form called buck breaking on black men in order to get them to submit to their will. Crimes such as these was the reason why slaves ended up revolting against their slave owners, such as Nat Turner. This is what ultimately led to the Civil War and slavery being abolished by the United States.
Cause of the United States Civil War.
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do.
Thank you. And in the year 2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery? Next question.
And this mentality is the reason why black people were oppressed for 400 years in America. They don't want to admit the truth that America committed crimes against humanity, against their own so-called citizens. They would also like us to believe that the abolishment of slavery was the end of black people's oppression in America. That is not true. It only got worse after slavery. They used propaganda in books and film to convince the white American public that black people were their enemies and that they should avoid being around these people at all costs. This led to segregation and the deaths of many innocent black men who were accused of being beasts who only want to rape white women. For years, this propaganda allowed white mobs to get away with committing crimes against free black people.
In Natchez, Mississippi in the 1800s. I don't know the correct date, but I know it was during the 1800s when a lot of plantation slaves was free. And they overrun Natchez, Mississippi. So the Union Army, under the leadership and the slaughter of Captain John Mason, round all the slaves up, put them down in this located area and put walls up around. Took all the men, took the women and children and separate them. 20,000 lost soul family, mostly women and children, died right there in Natchez, Mississippi, in this wilderness of peach trees that nobody don't go down there and eat right now.
As you can see, the United States government itself were active participants in the oppression of black people during these 400 years. This brings us to the Jim Crow era, which lasted from 1877 until the 1960s.
After the Civil War, the United States created a law to protect the rights of previously enslaved African Americans. But the Jim Crow laws were specifically designed to undermine and disregard these rights. From the 1870s to the 1960s, Jim Crow laws enforced a cruel racial hierarchy in the southern states. These laws deliberately bypassed the protections established after the Civil War, including the 15th Amendment, which granted black men the right to vote 150 years ago. These discriminatory laws stripped black people of their rights, subjected them to public humiliation, and perpetuated their economic and educational marginalization. Anyone who challenged this social order faced ridicule, harassment, and even violence. The term Jim Crow originated in the 1820s when a white comedian named Thomas Rice created a character named Jim Crow. This stereotypical character became a common feature in minstrel shows and was also used as a derogatory nickname for black people. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment officially ended slavery. However, white Americans in the former Confederacy opposed it.
This is the part of history that they don't like to acknowledge. They would like us to believe that after the Civil War, black people had no more problems in this country. This is far from the truth. During the Jim Crow era, black people were still being lynched in the South. Those who protested peacefully were still being attacked and brutalized by white society. This also was still the time of segregation, so black people weren't allowed to use white establishments. This was all but 60 years ago, but somehow today they pretend like none of this ever happened. When we tell our story, they tell us to get over it, but when it comes to the Jewish Holocaust, that we are always reminded by it in our media and schools as well. So when Kanye West spoke on this issue of the black people being treated indifferently to the Jews, they told him to visit the Holocaust Museum as if black people hadn't gone through anything themselves for the last 400 years. So Kanye had to remind them of what we've been through. He said that Planned Parenthood is a part of our Holocaust Museum. You see, when they talk about the Holocaust, they seem to forget that the Nazis also hated black people as well. In fact, the Nazis got their race ideology from America. You see, eugenics began in the late 19th century in England, but it wasn't until it was brought to America that it began to be actually carried out. This racy ideology believed that the white race was superior to everybody else and that these lesser races should stop giving birth because they were deemed to be unfit by these same racist white people. So even before the Holocaust, America was trying to exterminate the black race, and this is what influenced the Nazi Germanys as well as being funded by these same white people back in America. If you don't know, Prescott Bush, Henry Ford, as well as the IMF and many other businesses donated money to the Nazi Party. But back here in the States, they wanted to exterminate the Negro population, as said by Margaret Sanger, the Planned Parenthood founder, in 1939. This is why up until this day, black women have the most abortions out of everyone else, considering black people only make up 12 to 13% of the US population. This was part of a depopulation agenda that still goes on today. Margaret Sanger is quoted as saying, "Covertly invest into non-white areas, invest in ghetto abortion clinics, help to raise money for free abortions in primarily non-white areas, perhaps abortion clinic syndicates throughout North America that primarily operate in non-white areas and receive tax support should be promoted." So the population agenda is still being promoted, especially by the Democratic Party today. So the US government is still complicit just as they was in the Jim Crow era. During that time, there was a study about untreated syphilis in the Negro male populations. It was called the Tuskegee Study, and the federal government oversaw an experiment in which about 400 black men with syphilis were deliberately left untreated so the doctors could study the disease. They tested out experimental medicines on these black people, but left them untreated for what they initially signed up for. Just another example of the US government's involvement in the crimes committed against their own population. This was not all. They also allowed white mobs to burn down black communities and get away with it. These black communities was very prosperous and well off before being burnt down by white mobs. Even until this day, there was never any reparations paid out to those who were victims.
11 people have died in drowning or boating accidents on Lake Lanier this year, including a father and son. Charged with responding to all of those calls are divers with the local fire departments.
11 Alive's Caitlin Ross shows you what they deal with under the surface of Lake Lanier. It's dangerous and deadly environment.
Clear and calm on the surface, Lake Lanier is anything but.
You can get yourself in trouble really quickly.
Lanier was built in the 1950s to provide drinking water and hydroelectric power for Atlanta. Recreation was an afterthought.
As they were building the lake, they raised the water level up to a certain point well below what we know of today as full pool, and then stopped filling the water.
From there, construction crews floated on the lake, cutting off the trees about halfway.
So today, those stumps are still there. And they're tall because this was forest land and farmland.
Also beneath the surface, old homes, barns, even a racetrack.
Lake Lanier, that shit not a lake. Under it, it was a black community. Most of these lakes made the cover up evidence. Y'all swimming in graveyards, gotta be losing it. Seneca Village, a black town up in New York, where black people own all their properties. They tore it down and put up Central Park. They was hating on us the whole time, what the fuck? Cowaliga, black town in Alabama destroyed. Now it's Lake Martin, Susanna, another town under that lake. Those is black Wall Streets, we can never be great. Vanport, Oregon, another black town got flooded. Now that shit Delta Park. Where's our reparations? What the hell? These crimes need a punishment worse than jail. Warren in Baltimore, Maryland, a community that was black ran. And guess what them niggas put over it? I goddamn down. I know it's a black town under the Hoover. I know it's a black town under Lake Mead. I know it's a black town under all these goddamn lakes. In the day, niggas stoking our breed. Got my ancestors under the sea. Got my ancestors buried on trees. Where the fuck is my goddamn money? Y'all paying these taxes, but what about me?
And since we're on the topic of a failed justice system, did you know that a black boy who was only 14 years old named George Stinney Jr. was the youngest person to ever be executed in America for a crime he did not commit? He was executed by electric chair for the murder of 2 girls, and he was so short that he had to use a Bible as a booster seat in order to be electrocuted. In 2014, the court ruled that he had not received a fair trial. So that's just the hypocrisy of this so-called Christian nation. This was not the only innocent blood they spilled during that time. Emmett Till, another black boy, was brutally murdered because a white woman lied and said he had inappropriately touched her. The white man who brutally beat and killed this little boy got away with the crime, and the woman who lied was never brought in for justice. Mind you, they are still charging people in their 90s for war crimes committed in Nazi Germany. But a white woman in America who was responsible for the murder of an innocent black boy got to live out her entire life without being charged. The death of Emmett Till is what led to the civil rights movement in the 60s. But did you know that the US government declared war on all black leaders who was tired of the oppression? Black people in the 60s began to stand up against those who have oppressed them for many years, and they were not afraid to fight back during this time period. So rather than the government fixing these issues that led to black people standing up for themselves, they chose to suppress black people everywhere that they were. Those leading this operation was J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. The main objective of this intelligence agency was focused on preventing the rise of a black messiah. So instead of the FBI using their funding and resources on stopping actual criminals in America, they focused on stopping black leaders who were no threat to anyone. They just wanted to improve the conditions of their people that were suffering through all these years. To make things even worse, it has now come out that the actual criminals, who at the time was the Italian mafia, they were blackmailing the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, for being an undercover homosexual. J. Edgar Hoover was afraid of being exposed as a homosexual to the public, so he focused on targeting black leaders instead of focusing on the mob. So the main objective of the FBI was stopping the rise of a black messiah who would make things better for their people. This is why we don't have black leaders really standing up for our cause like we did in the past.
Number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not of violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
So what happened next for black people after our black leaders were being assassinated and imprisoned by the US government? Did things get better following the civil rights movement?
at all. The man in the house rule. Black families have long been the victims of income inequality and bad government policies. The irony, of course, is that conservatives pushed black mothers to break their families to get welfare. Before 1968, many states and administrative agencies created and enforced the man in the house rule. This rule basically meant that if there is a working or healthy man in the house, the government can't help you. And they would go as far as to send welfare workers to visit the homes without warning to check if a man was present. If they found any evidence whatsoever, families lost their welfare benefits. Over the years, the welfare state started dissolving the family structure, slowly but surely. A man who can't get a decent job and provide a substantial income suddenly believes that his family is better off without him. So, if a man were to lose his job, he literally had to leave the house so his children could get government surplus peanut butter, beans, and cheese. On the other hand, if either the woman or the man, or both, were irresponsible, they faced no consequences for their actions. And it was the taxpayers who ended up paying for it. These things aren't exactly designed to keep the marriage intact. They are meant to divide people. The harm done to the children was massive. Many children experienced the hurt from broken families at such a young age. The welfare state did what slavery couldn't do. It broke families apart. And broken families fuel poverty. The structure of the family can influence the choices children make. For example, boys raised without their fathers are more likely to drop out of school, get violence, use drugs, or go to jail. Girls are more likely to have a child out of wedlock or engage in sexual activities at a very early age. These children are also more prone to mental health problems, which can affect them as adults. A psychology test detailed in Roy Baumeister and John Tierney's book, Willpower, showed that children from fatherless households were more likely to settle for a small prize straight away. In contrast, children with fathers present were more willing to wait for a bigger prize. Experts from the Northwestern Institute for Policy Research challenged that these effects are primarily due to dangerous neighborhoods or poor schools. They found that the direct effect of family structure itself played a more significant role. As marriage rates declined among the poor and working class in the US, the institution of marriage has remained strong among the wealthier population, with similar rates to those from 50 years ago. At the same time, the decrease in marriage among the working class has led to a significant rise in out-of-wedlock births, often to couples who are living together without being married. This happens because people view marriage as an ideal situation, but feel it is unachievable, yet they still want to have children.
So after the civil rights movements that took place in the 60s, things did not get better for black people. In fact, they actually got worse. Many of the jobs that black men relied on to take care of their families ended up moving overseas for the cheap labor as well as to save money on taxes. This left many black men jobless, and it led to a spike in poverty as well as a spike in criminal activities. But what most don't realize is the federal government played a role in all of these things. This led to the mass incarceration time period that we are still living in. This began in the 1970s when the government was still targeting black leaders and sending many of them to jail on false charges. This left black communities in shambles as they no longer had the leadership as well as the organization that they once had during the 60s. It was also during this time that black communities was being flooded with drugs as planned by the United States government. It's already been proven that the CIA allowed crack cocaine to enter the States as a way to fund wars overseas. So black people were already feeling the effects of poverty at the time, but to make things worse, the government deliberately allowed these drugs to be flooded into black ghettos all across America. So with many black fathers struggling to find jobs, as well as with the black woman being forced to be the single parent of the household in order to receive welfare from the government, as well as the addictive drugs being flooded into these communities in which both the black man and woman feel victim to, this led to even more of an increase in poverty as well as criminal activity, as the young black males who was raised in these single parent households would go on to create gangs as well as join pre-existing gangs, and this led to even more of an increase in mass incarceration of the black men. This destructive cycle that still has yet to be fixed is the reason why black people are ranked second highest in poverty in the United States. So instead of the government correcting their wrongdoing and orchestrating the entire crack epidemic that took place in black communities, They waged war against the black population by declaring the war on drugs. This led to a heavy police presence in black communities all across America. While in these communities, they not only targeted the criminals, but they also targeted innocent black men, which led to many police brutality incidents, especially during the 90s. But even today, this still has not changed. And in present times, we can see the hypocrisy of this nation in the way they deal with white people when it comes to drugs compared to the mass incarceration of black people during the 90s. Back then, black people were getting locked away for even the smallest amounts of drugs. And oftentimes, they even had police plant drugs on them, which sent them away for years. But with this opioid crisis of today, just notice the way that they treat white people compared to the way that they treated black people.
People moving out, people moving in. Because of the color of the skin. Run, 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 but so they have. And I bought that, 242. Vote for me and I'll set you free. Rebel, brother, rebel. And it's like a suit in a bow tie. Like the boy block up like the 4th of July. They got caught lacking, the whole world wanna know why. Went out to eat on his birthday. 4 shot, 3 dead in the worst way. Damn. He kept dissing on me.
Baby love, my baby love, I need you, oh, my baby love. But all you do is treat me bad.
I'm out of town, thugging with my round. My coochie pink, my booty hole brown. Where the niggas, I'm looking for the hole.
How did we go from being a part of the Black Panther movement to killing ourselves just that quick? Who is it that benefits from our self-destruction? It is the ones who have always benefited off of black slaves. Nothing has changed about America. The ones who made a fortune off of slavery are still the ones who are in power today. They are the constant reminder that black people are still not as free as they think in America.
Are you anti-Semitic?
Anti-Semitic?
You've many of the things that I've read about you, and you've made a mention a couple of times about the Jews and everything, and I'm wondering if you are personally anti-Semitic.
No. How can I be anti-Semitic when the Arabs are half the Muslim world is Semitic? If I was anti-Semitic, I'd be anti-Arab and anti-everything else. No, I think that in this country, there's one mistake that the Jews make. They put themselves in a position where whenever anybody gives an objective analysis of the role that they play, they defend themselves by accusing you of being anti-Semitic. And a Negro is not anti-Semitic when he says that the man who's exploiting him in his community is white, because it is a white man who owns all the stores. Now, is it an accident that these whites who own these stores are Jewish? If it's an accident, then the fact that he says the Jew on the corner is exploiting me isn't an anti-Semitic statement. It's just more descriptive of the man who's exploiting him.
So this still holds true today. When we talk about our white oppressors, the so-called Jewish people are not exempt from this. Not only have they benefited from being white in America, but they also benefited from pretending to be the ally of Black America. And when they get exposed for exploiting our people, here's what they say.
Must be eradicated wherever it's found in the Middle East or in the ghettos of the United States.
Correct.
That's typical Hitlerian propaganda.
Typical what kind?
Hitlerian, Hitler, Adolf Hitler, a German, a Nazi.
Yeah, I understand. Look
here.
That's
German propaganda.
I understand. Let me tell you a tactic of Zionism. What they do is that every time you say something, they bring out Hitler. You understand? And they make you feel scared about Hitler. Okay, if Hitler killed as many Jews as he did, then what the Jews should do is take Germany. Why you go to Palestine? The Arabs ain't did nothing to you. Number one. Go to Germany.
Because Germany.
I have no responsibilities up there.
So every time these people get exposed for the role they play in oppressing people, they like to hide behind these words that really hold no true meaning. No one else has this shield of protection when it comes to exploiting and oppressing people. And the sad thing is, the Anglo-Saxons often condone this behavior by the Jewish people. So this is why Malcolm viewed them as equal counterparts. So these people are in control as they have always been, and money is the new chains that keep our people under bondage. It is no longer a secret who controls the money in America. They are so powerful that even if a black billionaire was to speak out against them, they could lose it all just in one day. So it's not a conspiracy, but a real life observation of what we clearly can see. These same people profit off the trauma and struggle of black people in America. They also are responsible for degeneracy as well as the satanic agenda being pushed in America. And just as the FBI wanted to prevent the rise of a black messiah, well, these people have the same agenda. They're preventing the rise of a black messiah by turning them into black queens. If it wasn't for the paycheck, a lot of black men would not be doing the things that they do in this industry. The feminization of black men in America is just as destructive as the things that we mentioned previously in this video. And those who are responsible are the executives and financiers of what is being pushed in the industry. So when we see promotion of the devil, Yahuah being mocked, as well as gun violence, sexual exploitation, homosexuality, these things are being pushed by those who are on top. It is up to us to break out of these mental chains of slavery and to get back to who we were truly meant to be. We are the chosen people of the Most High, and we must also not forget that we built this country into what it has become, so we must hold those responsible for what they have done to us. Zionist Christian pastor John Hagee is quoted for saying, "The day America turns its back on Israel is the day God will turn his back on America." Well, they have turned their back on Israel because we are the real chosen people of the Bible. Instead of the government paying money back to those who were the ancestors of slaves who built this nation, they would rather send it overseas to a nation cosplaying as Israel. The Congress of this nation knows how to come together real quick to support people who were not oppressed for 400 years in this country. The billions that they send to this hypocritical nation is being used to kill and destroy innocent people. All of that money could have been used here at home to support the citizens, or at least the so-called citizens of this nation. This is why this nation is going to be judged by the Most High. America has always been morally bankrupt from its beginning, and they still use the people that they oppressed for 400 years to be the face of their own racist ideology. America has no shame in all of the crimes that it has committed, and it also thinks that it will get away with these things. Here's what the Most High says in chapter 47 of Isaiah. He says, "Virgin daughter Babylon, sit on the ground without a throne, queen city of Babylonians. No more will you be called tender or delicate. Take millstones and grind flour. Take off your veil, lift up your skirt, bare your legs, and wade through the streams. Your nakedness will be exposed, and your shame uncovered. I will take vengeance." So this video is just a reminder of all the things that they have done to us during these 400 years and the judgment that is to come upon this nation. Right on cue, since 2019, America has been on a downward trajectory. 400 years ago, it was 1619 when the so-called first black people arrived to the English colonies here in America. So with the current events that we are living through in this nation, you can see that the words of the Most High is starting to come true when he says, "I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions." Genesis chapter 15, verse 14, the 400-year prophecy.